everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. So today, we're going on a journey, and
A journey.
yeah, a journey to uncover the challenges that autistic women face. We hear about autism a lot,
Right.
right? But the experience can be, like, so different for women.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today, like going beyond just the general stuff about autism
Right.
and trying to figure out how, like, age and what society expects from women,
Oh, interesting.
how all of that kind of comes together.
So how being a woman can actually, like, change how people see your autism and even how it gets diagnosed.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got some really cool blog posts and articles from Cheap ABA to help us out. They do some awesome work, by the way.
Okay.
Really focus on personal stories, which I think is so important.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, how about this? Lots of women don't actually get diagnosed with autism until way later in life
Yeah.
compared to men.
Whoa, really?
Hmm.
Why is that?
Ageism, plain and simple. Think about it. When women get older, those little signs of autism, they can get dismissed as just quirks. You know, like, oh, that's just how she is, or it's just part of getting older.
So those assumptions about aging can actually hide the signs of autism.
You got it. And it's a huge problem because it means some women go, like, their whole lives
Wow.
without understanding why they feel different, why social situations can be so hard.
Makes sense. And speaking of social struggles, I've heard this term masking. What's that all about?
Oh, masking. It's basically trying to hide those artistic traits so you fit in better. We all do it sometimes.
Yeah.
But for autistic women, it can be like next level because of what society expects from them.
What do you mean by that?
Well, women are supposed to be agreeable, nurturing, you know.
All right.
But for an autistic woman, especially if they struggle with social cues
Uh-huh.
or get easily overwhelmed by like sensory stuff, those expectations can be a real nightmare.
So they're always trying to act in a way that society thinks is okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that takes a toll, believe me.
I bet. It sounds exhausting.
It is. In fact,
Mm.
Cheap ABA talks about how this masking is linked to higher rates of burnout,
Oh, wow.
anxiety, even depression in autistic women.
That's heavy stuff. So we have ageism, maybe delaying diagnosis, societal pressures leading to all this intense masking.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else in the mix here?
Yeah. There's one more big piece we can't forget. Sexism.
Okay, I'm all ears. How does sexism fit into all of this?
Remember those expectations we were talking about?
Yeah.
Well, they can actually lead to women being misdiagnosed.
Mm.
Cheap ABA brought up some really worrying stuff about this. For example, an autistic woman who's, you know, very sensitive emotionally
Uh-huh.
might get labeled as having an anxiety disorder or even a personality disorder.
Because those are seen as women's issues.
Bingo. And that's really bad because she's not getting the help she actually needs as an autistic person.
So it's like gender stereotypes are making it even harder to see the reality of autism in women.
Exactly. And this is where things get interesting. To really wrap our heads around this,
Yeah.
we need to talk about something called intersectionality.
Oh, I've heard that word before, but
Yeah.
honestly, not sure I get it. Can you break it down?
Sure. Basically, it means the different parts of who you are, like being a woman, your age, your race, all that,
Right.
they don't just exist separately. They all, like, overlap and affect each other.
So for an autistic woman, it's not just up about the autism.
Right.
It's about how that autism plays out while also being a woman in a society that already has all these ideas about both women and neurodiversity.
You nailed it. And, you know, for some women, those overlapping identities mean they face even more challenges.
Yeah.
But for others, it can actually be a source of strength and resilience.
It really shows how important it is to look at the whole person, not just label them.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another super important point.
Yeah.
We have to make sure we're hearing directly from autistic women.
Oh, for sure.
Places like Cheap ABA, their blog, are so crucial because they give those voices a platform.
Yeah. Some of their blog post titles really caught my eye, like What Women with Autism Want You to Know and Hidden Struggles of Adult Women with Autism.
Yes.
It's like they're saying, hey, listen up. There are all these different experiences within the autistic community.
Exactly. And here's what blows my mind. When we really focus on what autistic women are saying, it actually helps us understand autism better as a whole.
Interesting.
It's like it forces us to broaden our definition of what autism even looks like,
Yeah.
to move past those narrow stereotypes.
Wow, that is powerful. So after all of this, where do we go from here?
It means recognizing that, autism isn't a one-size-fits-all thing.
Yeah.
How it shows up, the challenges it brings, those could be totally different depending on whether you're a man or a woman, how old you are, all those intersecting factors.
And if we want to be truly supportive, if we want to build systems that are truly inclusive,
Yes.
we have to acknowledge all that complexity.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's actually where we'll pick things up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Awesome. But before we move on, let's pause for a second and let all this sink in. And while you're doing that, here's a question for you to think about. If how we view gender and age really does affect how we see and diagnose autism, what can we do to make sure our support systems are more inclusive and fair? Welcome back to the deep dive. In part 1, we talked about how ageism and sexism can, kind of mix with autism and create these challenges
Right.
that often get missed. It really got me thinking about how much we still don't get about how autism shows up, especially for women.
Yeah, for sure. And the stuff from cheap ABA really emphasizes that, we
Yeah.
need to move past those typical pictures of what we think autism looks like.
Because those stereotypes are not only wrong, but they can actually be harmful.
Totally agree. They can prevent people from getting diagnosed properly, getting the support they need, even leading to feelings of isolation. One of the most fascinating things I've been seeing in these sources is how autistic traits can actually manifest differently in women because of this complex mix of biological and social factors.
So it's not that women are naturally better at hiding their autism, it's more that they're pushed to do it from when they're young because of all those expectations we talked about.
Absolutely. Think about it. All those messages girls get about being quiet, being agreeable, expressing their emotions in very particular ways. For anyone, that can be a lot. But for an autistic girl who might already be struggling with social communication or getting overwhelmed by sensory stuff, it's almost impossible.
It's really sad to think about young girls feeling like they always have to hide who they are just to fit in.
And that's where understanding the impact of masking on their mental health becomes so important. Cheap ABA really delves into this, talking about how it can lead to something called autistic burnout.
Autistic burnout. I've actually never heard of that before. What is that exactly?
Basically, imagine you're autistic, especially a woman, and you've been masking for a long time. It's like a state of extreme exhaustion, overwhelm. Imagine constantly trying to meet those social expectations while also dealing with sensory overload and navigating social situations that are already hard. It's incredibly draining.
Makes sense. It sounds like it would put so much stress on you, both mentally and physically.
Exactly. It's not just exhaustion. It can show up as anxiety, depression, even physical health issues.
One of the articles had this quote that really stuck with me. It was a woman describing masking, and she said it's like living with constant performance anxiety.
Wow. That's powerful, isn't it? It really sums up how emotionally draining masking can be.
It makes you realize we need to be way more understanding and compassionate. Instead of judging someone for seeming awkward or off, we should think about the fact that they might be carrying this invisible weight around.
Absolutely. And when you connect that to the bigger picture, it raises this crucial question. How can we create a society where autistic women don't feel this intense need to mask in the first place?
That's the ultimate question, right? I imagine it would take a huge change in how we see and value neurodiversity as a whole.
For sure. And it all starts with education. Educating doctors, teachers, employers, and really everyone about all the different ways autism can show up, especially in women.
We need to get rid of those harmful stereotypes and make space for autistic people to be themselves without being judged or discriminated against.
Right. Cheap ABA also talked a lot about self-advocacy and the importance of finding communities that support you. They had some great advice for autistic women on how to speak up for themselves, set boundaries, and find people who understand their experiences.
That sense of community can be so powerful, right? It can give you that feeling of validation, belonging, and being understood, which is often missing out in the world.
Absolutely. It's about making those safe spaces where artistic women can take off those masks, connect with each other, and support one another. And that's where storytelling comes in. The more we share these personal stories, the more we can challenge those harmful stereotypes and misconceptions that lead to isolation and stigma.
I loved how the cheap ABA articles were full of these incredible stories from autistic women about finding themselves, being resilient, and fighting for change.
Those stories are so important, right? They can change hearts and minds. They create empathy and understanding where there was once ignorance or judgment.
It's about realizing that autism isn't something bad. It's just a different way of experiencing the world.
And those differences can actually be amazing strengths. Autistic individuals often have unique skills and ways of looking at the world that can truly make society better.
So instead of trying to fix or cure autism, we should be making a world that celebrates and embraces those differences.
A world where everyone has the chance to reach their full potential no matter how their brain works.
I love that idea. And it goes beyond just changing attitudes, right? It's about changing our systems and institutions as well.
Absolutely. We need to fight for better healthcare, education, and job opportunities for autistic people. We need to make environments that are sensory friendly and accommodate different ways of learning. And we need to build understanding and acceptance in our communities so that autistic people truly feel valued and supported.
It's a huge task, but it's one we can't afford to ignore. It reminds me of what we were talking about earlier, intersectionality. As we go deeper into these sources, I'm struck by how closely connected all these issues really are. We can't talk about autism without also talking about sexism, ageism, and ableism.
You're absolutely right. That's what intersectionality is all about, isn't it? It's about recognizing how all these different forms of oppression overlap and make things even harder for marginalized groups.
And it reminds us that fighting for disability rights is also a fight for gender equality, racial justice, and social justice as a whole.
Because real equality means creating a world where everyone has the chance to thrive, no matter their differences.
Cheap ABA really highlighted how important it is for autistic women to have access to the right information and support.
They talked about how hard it can be to navigate the healthcare system, which often dismisses or misdiagnoses their experiences.
And how important it is to find therapists, doctors, and other professionals who are knowledgeable about autism and sensitive to the needs of women.
They also talked about the power of peer support groups and online communities.
Where autistic women can connect with people who get them and celebrate their strengths.
Because sometimes just knowing you're not alone makes all the difference.
There's this one story from the Cheap ABA blog that comes to mind. A woman was talking about how she felt like an outsider for years, like something was wrong with her.
And then she found this online forum for autistic women.
And it was like a light bulb went off for her. She finally found a space where she felt seen, heard, and understood.
That sense of belonging can be so powerful, can't it?
Absolutely. It can help break down those feelings of isolation and shame that so many autistic women feel.
And it can empower them to speak up for themselves and their needs.
Because when you know you're worthy, you're more likely to demand the respect and support you deserve.
And that's such a powerful message.
It really is. And it needs to be heard loud and clear.
So let's keep sharing these stories, keep challenging those misconceptions, and keep amplifying those voices.
Because the more we learn about the different experiences of autistic women, the better we'll be at creating a more inclusive and fair world for all.
A world where everyone has the opportunity to shine.
What a great thought. And it reminds us that this deep dive isn't just about learning. It's about taking action.
Exactly. It's about using what we've learned to make a real difference in our communities.
Whether that's educating ourselves and others, advocating for policy changes, or simply being more aware of our language and how we interact with each other.
Every little step we take can help build a world that's more just and compassionate.
And that's definitely a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. Well, it seems we've reached the end of part 2 of our deep dive. Don't worry, though, we'll be back in part 3 to uncover even more insights from the cheap ABA materials and bring everything together.
Until then, we encourage you to think about everything we've discussed and consider how you can apply these ideas to your own life.
Because, as we've seen, understanding the experiences of autistic women isn't just about them, it's about all of us.
It's about building a world where everyone has the chance to thrive.
And that's definitely something worth working towards.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive. We've covered so much ground already, looking at how societal pressures and those...
Those stereotypes.
Yeah, exactly. How they can really impact the lives of autistic women. Honestly, it's been like a huge learning experience even for me.
It has been. And one thing that's become super clear, especially from those cheap ABA articles and posts, is that, well, there's no one story when it comes to autism.
Yeah, it's not like there's a single way to be autistic, is there?
Not at all. And the materials from cheap ABA, they really highlight that diversity, especially among women, which is so important because, like we've been saying, those stereotypes, they can be incredibly damaging.
For sure, they can stop people from getting diagnosed and getting the right kind of support.
Yeah, absolutely. And they keep pushing this idea that there's a right way to be autistic, which is just so wrong.
Totally. So if we're moving away from those stereotypes, embracing all that diversity, what does that look like? Like, what's the alternative?
Well, Cheap ABA has some great pieces that explore this idea of neurodiversity. Have you come across that term before?
I have, yeah, but I'm not sure I totally get it, to be honest.
Oh, it's pretty straightforward. It's basically the idea that differences in how our brains work, those are totally normal, part of
Yeah.
human variation. So instead of seeing autism as a disorder, it's about seeing it as just a different way of thinking and being.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. So it's not about trying to fix people, it's about accepting and appreciating those differences.
Exactly. And that shift, it's huge because it opens up so many more possibilities for understanding, accepting, and supporting autistic people. We shouldn't be forcing them to fit into a box. We should be building a society that actually values their strengths and perspectives.
I love that. And it reminds me of something else that really struck me from the cheap ABA stuff, how they highlighted all the talents and abilities that autistic women often have.
Oh, for sure.
Like talents that a lot of times get overlooked or underestimated.
Yeah, they talked about autistic women who are amazing artists, writers, musicians, scientists, even entrepreneurs.
Yes. And they stressed how important it is to make sure autistic folks have the chance to use those skills to contribute to the world in meaningful ways. I bet a lot of people would be surprised at the incredible things autistic people are capable of.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's this one article about autistic women in tech that I found really fascinating. It talked about how their attention to detail, their problem-solving skills, their ability to think outside the box.
Oh, I can see that.
It makes them incredibly valuable in that field.
But I'm guessing it's not always smooth sailing, right?
Unfortunately, no. The article also talked about the challenges they face in a workplace that's, well, often not set up for their needs. Sensory overload, social anxiety, communication differences, those can be really tough to deal with in a typical work setting.
Which is exactly why we need to change those systems, right? If we want real inclusion, we have to tackle those barriers head on.
Absolutely. We need workplaces that are more inclusive, more accessible for neurodivergent folks. That means things like designing sensory-friendly spaces, offering flexible schedules, and having really clear ways to communicate.
And it also means like questioning all those unwritten rules and social norms that can exclude or push away people who are different, right?
You got it. True inclusion means valuing every kind of diversity. It means understanding that those different perspectives, those different ways of thinking, they can actually lead to amazing innovation and progress.
I love that idea. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the most important things you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
One of the most powerful messages that resonated with me from the cheap ABA materials was this emphasis on self-love and acceptance for autistic women. They talked about the process of learning to embrace who you are, as an autistic person, and rejecting all those messages that tell you you're not good enough or that you need to be fixed.
That's so crucial, especially for autistic women who face so much pressure about how they should act, who they should be.
Exactly. It's about taking back that power, deciding for yourself what makes you worthy, and recognizing that being autistic isn't something to be ashamed of. It's actually a source of strength.
Beautifully said. Honestly, as we finish up this episode, I'm feeling so inspired by the resilience, the creativity, the advocacy of autistic women.
Me too. They're really out there breaking down barriers, changing those stereotypes, and paving the way for a future that's more inclusive and fair for everyone.
They're showing us that neurodiversity isn't a burden, it's a gift. It brings unique perspectives, talents, ways of being to our world.
And it's something we should be celebrating.
Absolutely. So to everyone listening out there, we hope this deep dive has been insightful and given you lots to think about. Remember, this is just the start of a much bigger conversation.
We encourage you to keep learning, keep exploring, and check out the resources we've mentioned throughout the episodes. You can find those links in the show notes.
And keep sharing the stories and voices of autistic women. They're making a difference, and their voices are so important.
Their perspectives are vital to building a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Until next time.